what we're going to do today is kind of pick back up. I changed my itinerary from what I originally had to kind of focus on finishing out kind of the interface for CalTopo. So we will look at the right-hand sidebar, which once again I think of as their stuff, and the left-hand column, which is where we add stuff. And so we're going to take a look at things that I find particularly useful. And I think this is where some of the really good stuff is, and I think y'all will enjoy it. So we'll look at map overlays, which are basically items that add additional information to existing maps. We will talk about map sheets, which are pretty interesting. Those are like maps that you would see at the trailhead or that you'd pick up at a visitor center somewhere that have a little bit different types of information than your standard topo maps might have. Then we'll go through some of the other features in the right-hand column, like forecast. There's some real-time data, satellite imagery, and forecast, but those are restricted to pro-level accounts. And then we'll look at shared data, which this is where, like I said, CalTopo is not really a social mapping website, but this is where you will find where other people, and you also, sometimes I click on something and I realize, oh, that was my map that was shared publicly. You know, and if you have a free account, anything that you save by default is public, and you'll see that it's not like very obvious. And then we'll take a little tour back over to the left-hand sidebar, where we'll work with a couple of the map objects and some of the custom layers. And some of this stuff is, like I said, what I really think is key for planning SOTA activations. So let's go over here, and we're going to skip over map sheets. It'll make a little more sense later. And the first thing that we'll look at are contours. And this overlay allows you to add contour lines over anything else. And what I like to use it for is looking at just a rough idea of activation zones on imagery. And so we are looking at Max Patch here, which a lot of folks around here may be familiar with. The Appalachian Trail cuts across the summit, but most people park right here and then take one of the shorter trails up. But if I turn on the contours, it gives you several different options. You can choose 40 foot or 10 foot or 20 meter. And so I like to look at 10-foot intervals. And basically what you can do, and I always like to give myself a little bit of a buffer. So instead of saying, 80 feet or 82 feet, whatever 25 meters is, if you count down like 6 contour lines, that can give you a rough estimate of where the activation zone is. And so I can see here, this is where one of the trails come in and meets up with the AT. And so when you pop out of the woods, I know you aren't in the activation zone, you're close. And it doesn't take you much longer on your hike up to really kind of be in the activation zone. And since this is all a big grassy bald, you can just walk up and, a lot of times I'll just set up somewhere up in here and I know it's good. We'll leave the contours on for a moment. The MapBuilder Overlay, and I should say there's a keyboard shortcut of C for turning on the contours and turning them back off. The MapBuilder Overlay is a nice feature. Once again, the MapBuilder data is CalTopo's in-house data set, and I like to think of it more as a database where you can pull bits of information out. And so I do use the keyboard shortcut a lot. It basically gives you very nicely well-defined lines for map features that just make them stand out a little bit better. And so like there, you can, it's no issue seeing the trails. There's the Appalachian Trail. Here's the trail coming up from the parking lot. Here's the other loop trail coming up, as well as road features and boundaries. Here we've got the North Carolina-Tennessee state line, as well as obviously a National Forest Service boundary. So that's, I think, a very handy feature that I use a lot of times just when I'm trying to get, a little cleaner picture of the trails or the roads in an area. So I think Paul, not N1ZF, but Arizona Paul, we'll call him, brought up slope angle shading. And slope angle shading uses elevation data to give you an idea of how steep a slope is. And it can be very beneficial, like Paul was saying, out west where they have a lot of summits without any trails, and you have to figure out what is the best way up there. One of the ways that topo maps lie to you is they are not good at revealing smaller details on the land. And so, topo maps are kind of like a best guess, generalization of the terrain. And so if we turn that on, which also has a keyboard shortcut of S, we can see that obviously where the contour lines are tighter, the darker color indicates that it's a steeper slope, but it also indicates that there are some areas that are kind of in the middle of a steeper area, that if you were coming from this trail over here, coming up through the center here might actually be a decent route in the midst of, cliff-like structures. Now, a lot of the overlays also have a legend that will appear down here at the bottom. And so if you turn that on, slope angle shading on, you will see that it gives you a little scale relating to the colors of how steep things are. You also have an option over here. I think the fixed is a better option for this because it primarily shows the steeper gradients, whereas just the gradient it's kind of all across the board from 0 on up. So usually you are more concerned with the steeper slopes. And so that may help you pick out a route that otherwise would not be that apparent. And also, we'll talk about this later, but the elevation data is also good for picking out not only man-made features, but some natural features as well that you normally can't pick out on a topo map. So here we're looking at another popular area in the southeast, and this is where we've had our spring camp out the last couple of years. We're going to skip over geology. It's kind of cool. It gives you an idea of the makeup of the land around, but it means nothing to me, and I don't think it's beneficial to planning for SOTA. But the public lands overlay, this is kind of what I consider the poor man's parcel data. And so once again, you'll get a legend down here at the bottom, and green is US Forest Service, kind of this pinkish color is National Park Service. I don't have any experience with BLM land out west. Very rarely do I see the local or state used. I do see tribal used just because we have the Cherokee reservation in North Carolina, so you will see that, and maybe up along the parkway if you're up around Bunches Bald. But here we can see, you know, that we've got national parkland. That's obviously the Blue Ridge Parkway coming up through there. But it's interesting that there's also that little ring of national parkland. But then you have all the national forests. So that's an easy way to kind of gauge if you're going on public property or not. So, my opinion, the parcel data layer is worth the price of admission for the pro version. It is a pro only feature, and it doesn't cover the entire United States, but it covers a lot. And I guess maybe it depends on state or county regulation. Sometimes it won't tell you the owner, it'll just give you the property boundaries, but that's quite often enough to give you a hand. All this information you can look up freely on most county tax assessor's office websites. But if you've ever looked at any of those maps, they're really poor maps as far as trying to locate things. And that's one thing that's really great about having the parcel data in CalTopo is it makes it very easy to see when you may be near a property boundary, and it makes it easy to cross-reference against the tax maps if you want to try to look up contact information and gain access to private property. It also has a little drop down here where you can get the parcel number, which could be handy for looking them up in the tax information. But generally, I just look at the ownership. Or if you really don't care about that information, you can clean it up and just have the boundaries. So structures is another overlay that I do not use, but it is kind of interesting that all that information is out there. So another feature that I find extremely useful is the motor vehicle use map overlay. And what that does is that displays all the U.S. Forest Service, and I believe BLM roads. And here you got like an expanded legend that gives you some idea. Basically, if it's a dash line, it's probably a gravel or dirt road. Green means it is open year round, and yellow means seasonal. And so this happens to be the Round Mountain Campground. The solid line means that it's paved, and the purple means that it's special designation, which means it probably seasonal as well. So this doesn't tell you when a road may be open. And so you will need to refer to the actual MVUMs, and most of them are like the printed maps, and I'll show you in a second their use as a map sheet. Most states, most national forests, I should say, have the seasonal restrictions on the actual map itself. There are some states like Tennessee where you actually need to go to their website and download the MVUM, and it's on like a separate page because it's more like a booklet than a standalone map. But it's important with the MVUM. This is what the Forest Service goes by as far as roads that the public can legally drive. So even if you drove up here to Rattlesnake Gap and the gate was open for this Forest Service road, if it was not within season, you could get your hands slapped at least, if not a fine for being on a closed road, even though it was open. And so if it's another Forest Service road that's not on a motor vehicle use map that's open, you probably shouldn't go down it either. So we'll take a slight segue from the rest of these overlays to take a look at map sheets. So once again, map sheets are like kind of more specific use maps. And so in this case, if I click on stack a map sheet, it gives you kind of a context sensitive menu here. And so we can see that in this area, we've got several map sheets that we can choose from. And what I'm looking for here is the Cherokee Unaka motor vehicle use map, I think. Maybe wrong. Let's see. And then, yep, that was the right one. And so let's turn off this overlay. These are historically some of the worst maps ever made. If you don't know where you're at on them, it's very difficult to figure out where you are. And so that's another reason it's nice to have the overlay, is you get the information right on the map that you're working with. And then you can cross-reference it to this map. Now, if I scan over here, this is a Tennessee map. So this was not the greatest example. So a lot of times there's a table right here, and it will tell you what the seasonal opening of that road right there was. Let's see if I can find you a better example. There we go. And so here we can see that Forest Service Road 287 is got a seasonal designation, or at least that chunk of it. And so we can go over here. Come on. And we can see that it's seasonally open from 4/15 to end of the year. And it's open to any highway legal vehicle. The motor vehicle use maps also have roads and trails that are open to off-highway vehicles as well. And so there's none on that map, but you do need to be careful that you are not on an off-highway vehicle track or expecting to drive on one. So another feature of map sheets, if you click on the little question mark, one of the options there is add to account. There are lots of things, and we'll look at a few other things we play with tonight, where you can add it to your account. And what that means is it's you have easier access to it in other maps. So like right now, this particular map sheet is kind of associated with the map that I'm using right now. These are not as big a deal because you can always pull them back up wherever you're at, because like I said, they are context sensitive, or I guess not context, but location sensitive. But some of the other features we'll play with later are good to save to your account. Now, one reason to save a map sheet to your account is if you want to have access to it on a mobile device in the CalTopo app, you will want to save it to your account so you can sync it to your phone. The other option with map sheets is crop to neatline. And basically what that's going to do is it's going to cut out all of the non-mapping information if it can do that. And so like in this case, I will click on that and it should maybe come on. That was not a good example. I'm pretty sure. There we go. So there it cuts out all the extraneous information and just leaves you with the map detail. And I know Mike was saying he used Avenza or Gaia, I can't remember. And it had all of the New York State Park maps in it, and so does CalTopo. And so once again, these are kind of like these very specialized maps for a particular location that might have, you know, some extra information that you wouldn't find. I don't, you know, most maps are not going to have picnic areas labeled. So these are always handy to have as a reference. And, you know, that would be a good one to, oh, I've already added that one to my account. So we will switch back down here and we will look at another example. Here is a hike near Standing Indian to a very infrequently activated SOTA summit. But the next overlay we're going to look at is fire history. And that is important for especially off-trail hiking. And once again, you get a legend that is kind of date-based this time. And so that we can see that this kind of pinkish color, orangish color is from 2012 to 2016. And you can actually see there in the middle that this was part of the 2016 Rock Mountain wildfire, which was a pretty big fire for the Southeast. And that's important for SOTA activators, since we do a fair amount of off-trail hiking. We can kind of gauge what sort of foliage is regrowing in that area based on the age of the forest fire. You know, the first 5 to 10 years after the forest fire, you get lots of ground cover, and a lot of that is the stuff that's got those sharp little spikes that like to bleed you. So it's always handy to have some idea of, are you going into an area that was subject to a forest fire? And you can see here that 2016 was a fairly bad year for the Southeast. But then you can see here, this one was just last year. So as always, the more information you can have at your disposal, the better off you are. If you know that there are ongoing wildfires in your area, you can also see pretty live and up to date from several different satellites and different systems out there. One thing that I don't use it much, I don't know how much utility it has. I think it's kind of nifty. The sun exposure will give you some idea of like what the sun, you know, the exposure, sun exposure will be at a certain time of day at a certain location. And so that may help, especially in the wintertime, to figure out when you need to start packing up, because you know it's going to start getting chilly. But don't have a whole lot of use for that. So I think this one's kind of interesting. Cell coverage. If anybody's been up to Roan High Nom, I would say that even Verizon is kind of sketchy. My phone's on AT&T, and I can pretty much guarantee you that's about the coverage I get. That's one of those summits that you have to walk around and hope that you get a spot out. T-Mobile isn't that great either. So generally, I don't worry about cell phone coverage these days. But there are still a few spots like Roan High Knob, Max Patch, which are still in poor coverage areas. So once again, I don't really use the forecasting layers too much. If you lived in Colorado or New Hampshire, you know, maybe the avalanche overlay would be beneficial this time of year. You can get some basic weather information. I'm sorry, it's a little slow. And then You know, I do kind of like the wind forecast, primarily just to see the direction the wind may be coming from, if it shows us. There we go. And once again, it gives you a legend down at the bottom with some indication of wind speed. The real-time data is a pro level feature. So you can see weather stations. So like here happens to be one. So you might be able to get some local weather from one of these guys. You know, once again, this information is probably available elsewhere, whether underground, but you know, having it available right here in CalTopo is kind of handy. Aircraft one is kind of cool, but kind of pointless. You can see all the aircraft in your area. And then moving down, not a whole lot of use, I don't think, in seeing what is your maps. Let's see, where am I here? But I have got some data here. Oh, that was from the 2022 fall campout map. And so that will show you information that you've created. Don't really need to go any details. Your tracks would be any tracks that you created with the CalTopo mobile app. So not tracks that you've drawn or anything like that. So we will move down to shared data. I really like this feature, and I'm starting to get very fond of the map builder features with the keyboard shortcut F. If you turn that on, it will give you an overlay that you can click on to retrieve more information about a feature. And so that will tell you that, I guess that's a residential road named Laurel Trail. And most of the data here is from the Open Street Mapping project. But it's kind of handy to have this stuff. Something that I literally just figured out or stumbled upon about an hour ago when getting ready for this. If it shows you a named summit or has a little summit icon on it, if you click on the name, it's going to take you to the Peak Bagger webpage. So, as I've said before, I'm always discovering new little doodads in CalTopo. So if I click on that road, it'll tell me that it's Forest Service Road 338. It even tells me that it's seasonal. That's kind of funny because that's the report that I've gotten back recently from several people, that it has gotten very rough. So I would say that this data may be fairly up to date. So it will even tell you things like who owns a power line and crazy stuff like that. I just like having extra features. It'll tell you where Fords are. It will tell you where a gate is located. So I find that very handy. And a viewpoint, all sorts of good stuff. So this is where you can find other people's information. So if you click on shared CalTopo maps, once again, you'll get this overlay with these little white lines. And if you click on them, you can see that actually there's several maps that it links to. One called Wilderness Areas, which once again, you never know what this information might lead to. It might be something good. It might not be beneficial for SOTA, but this is pretty cool. It's got like outlines of all the wilderness areas in the Southeast. This is one that I've looked at before. This is where somebody was going to the 4,000-foot peaks in Georgia. That's one of the hiking challenges, to hit all the Georgia 4,000 summits. And so, you know, I have stumbled upon routes to other summits by looking at other people's maps. And it's kind of cool to see also the information that they add to their own maps. Hey, that might be a good idea. And one thing I don't use very often, actually I don't use it all. Down at the bottom of the right-hand sidebar are some preset combinations. If you've ever clicked on the CalTopo link from a Summit info page or the SOTA Atlas, it will give you one of these presets. And what that does is it gives you a stack of layers, base layers, already pre-populated. And it is kind of nice the way they have it. So, you know, if there's a Forest Service map in the area, that's what will be 100%. If there wasn't a Forest Service map in the area, it would default back to the scan topos as the primary base layer. But generally speaking, I like to use the layers that I like, and I don't necessarily go with the presets. So, have I lost anybody yet? All right. Any questions?
Well, this last feature is pretty cool.
Which one?
The additional, I mean, I can see fire hydrants on my map.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's crazy. I mean, who would have thunk you could find out information on your local fire hydrant?
Yep, agreed.
Yeah, no, it just
Here goes another day.
always blows me away.
That's amazing.
So we will pop over to the left sidebar now, and we will look at a couple things over here. We'll skip over import export this time and look at those probably in the next one. So let me get rid of the features. Oh, I'm looking at shared. So we've already looked at markers and lines. I played with buffers yesterday. That's kind of nifty. I don't really have any utility for it though. You know, we've talked about creating a SOTA award for summits within, you know, a certain distance or on the Appalachian Trail. And that kind of can give you a nice little buffer along a line. But in my experiments last night, it does not work for a very long line. I do use polygons occasionally. And do I have that map up? No, I don't. So sometimes I use polygons to highlight information. So like on this map, these are indicated as good trails, but I know from boots on the ground experience that these are no longer trails. And so I just used a polygon, drew a polygon around those areas just to kind of highlight those. Now, I use polygons also to help. I use them for drawing out an activation zone, but it's not how I figure out what is in the activation zone. And so we'll go over that in a second, but just in general, obviously a polygon, you can just free form a crazy shape and you can choose what color it gets filled with, and you can choose, how solid the color is, so that you can still see items within it. And so we'll give you a better thing later. Folders are, in my opinion, very important. And so just to give you a quick example, when you create lines and markers, it creates these two little guys up here. Those are actually folders. But you can create your own folders, and we'll go over that more in the organizing your data and some of the features and benefits that they offer. But just keep in mind that even though this is kind of default titles, those are actually folders as well. So most of this other stuff we won't fool with. Let me open up another map. So the next item on the list is a locator. And what the locator allows you to do, and if we look over, close that up. If I try to add a locator, it'll tell me that it's only going to work on save maps only. And so you already have to have a map set up. And what it allows you to do when you add that, you can add basically a tracker for your Garmin inReach or an APRS beacon. And once again, you can get this information elsewhere. You can go to aprs.fi and see my tracks. But I think it's really nice and handy. So this was a trip that Scott, NZ4 and I went on last week, and I specifically did it, use my APRS HT because in general, tracking does not work very well in the Southeast. But I knew that it would work well as a demonstration for this. So I added my locator beacon, and you can see that as we started to climb up and my beacon started to go out, that this green line, more or less follows our path. And I think this is better than the other websites because it has intended path on it. So friends and family, chasers, could look at the map and actually see where you are in relation to your, intended course and destination. So I wish I could make use of this more in the Southeast, but it may be beneficial for folks out west who have greater line of sight and less tree cover. But I think that's a pretty cool feature. So next thing up on the list is, let's go somewhere else. Where can we go? So the next thing up here is Viewshed Analysis. And this is one of those features that was designed for the search and rescue community to see where their radio signals could cover and things like that. But it's handy for us in determining, once again, radio coverage. So if you're doing a VHF activation, you can create this little viewshed analysis. By default, it's going to think that your signal is 20 meters above the ground, which is usually, I think, a good estimate, but sometimes I may recommend bumping that up. And that will generate a overlay indicating where your signal should be able to reach more or less line of sight from that particular summit. I'm not much of a VHF operator, but I can see that that can be very handy. And it also could be handy to show you that your summit that you're going to would not be good for carrying the Yagi for 2 meters. So I guess it works both ways. So this is the next thing. This to me is the killer app for CalTopo, or one of them, I should say. So everybody's interested in figuring out where the activation zone is for a summit. And if you add, actually I skipped over what I wanted to talk about, but we'll go to DEM shading. And so you can look up the elevation of the summit on the summit info page or where else, you know, but oftentimes you'll find that the actual quoted elevation does not match up with either the topo maps you're looking at or the elevation data. And so the only truly accurate way to know you're in the activation zone is to take a GPS on a summit that has no, you know, a clear view of all the satellite constellation with a benchmark that you can calibrate, and then you can hike down and figure out, you know, where exactly it is. So this is always kind of a best guess scenario. But like looking here in the upper right, I can see that it's saying we're at 6210 feet close to the summit. And so what I will do is I'll go down and click on DEM shading, and then I can pick an elevation. And so I'll go 6210, and I usually give myself a little bit of a buffer. And so I'll go down 70 feet. And so that will take me down to 6140. And you can do, it defaults to like a color gradient, but I just choose the same color usually. And then you have an option over here for transparent or base layer. And I like the base layer option because then it allows you to change the transparency yourself, which I'll show you in a second. And then at the bottom, you want to click on Add Rule. And it will stick it over here in the rules box. And you can create other things based on, if you were only interested in super steep slopes, you could create a slope angle shading that only had stuff from 40 to 45 degrees or whatever, 63 degrees. You could do all sorts of crazy stuff with this, but this is what I primarily use it for. Once again, this one doesn't really apply for what we're talking about probably, but once again, you've got a save to account option where you could reuse this on a different map. So I'm now going to throw this down on the map, and I didn't give it a name, but that's it right there. And so, like I said, I can now change the transparency since I saved it as a base layer. But you can see I got a hole in the center. And what I will do quite often is I will go in and work my way up until I no longer have a hole. And so then I will adjust the lower end of the scale to keep my 70-foot range. And so now I've got some idea of that is the activation zone for Black Balsam Knob with, about a 12-foot buffer. Now, the catch is this is going to shade those elevations anywhere on your map. So maybe I shouldn't have picked one of the highest summits around.
Literally the only one that would have.
Yeah, exactly.
It happens on every other one.
So let's just for grins, we will change that to 5,000 feet. And so you can see there that, it's going to shade all those other areas that are out there. And so we'll go back to our real numbers. And so I kind of treat this as just this is the way I used to do it. And then I would just turn the layer on and off if I wanted to view it. But this is where I use the polygon feature now. And so now I've got me a nice shape that I can use to draw me a polygon. All right, I know I'm not staying in the lines, but so now I've got a polygon that is roughly the activation zone. And so I think that's much cleaner, and I can actually get rid of this terrain modeling that I had created because I'm done with it. And now, I can use this, to look at imagery to see, exactly where things are within the activation zone, how far down, I know that I can't go down past those rocks, etc. So, and then that's all you've got is that polygon, and then it's not going to create other, you know, splotches on your map elsewhere. Because quite often I'll be mapping several activation zones on the same map, and you know, you'll get kind of interference between them. So that is the way I map out activation zones now. So I know some of y'all have stumbled on this secret. But this is something that I use all the time for SOTA activations. I mentioned before that the elevation data is good at revealing man-made features as well as natural features too. And this happened to be one of the first places that I saw this. I know Mike WB2FUV found this recently. So the shaded relief layer is great at revealing stuff. So notice here on this hillside, we would never know there was anything there. But if I turn the shaded relief on, you can see all these weird lines. And, you know, those are obviously not natural. That's not a river running across the side of the mountain. Those are logging roads. And so I have found countless things that have aided me in getting to summits. And so obviously on the map, there is a road going up this drainage, but if I turn that on, I can see that there's actually another road coming down this ridge line. And then you can clearly see the road there. Now you'll notice that the actual map does a pretty poor job of, you know, following the actual road bed. I think this is the way it actually works, not what's on the map, you know. And so even when I'm tracing a line, you know, I'm not going to use this line that they give me. I'm going to draw my line based on the shaded relief, which is going to give me a much more accurate track to follow, in my opinion. Now, if you'll notice, even though we saw all these nice roads over here, they're all in the shadow. And so, you know, what the shaded relief does is it provides a light source from a certain compass direction at a certain azimuth. And the default shaded relief is from a 315-degree point on the compass, and I can't remember what the azimuth is. But obviously, it's very beneficial in some cases and not in others. But what if you could change that? Well, that's where I get out of there. That's where the custom relief layers come in. And just like the DEM shading, it gives you options. And so I can choose any compass angle that I want. So like let's for this one say I want it southeast and, you know, from a 30-degree angle. And then once again, you have to click the button to add it into this little box over here. And then you have a couple other options. So you have either the alpha or a multiply option. And for what we're talking about doing and revealing the features, you want an alpha composite. And that's what the normal shaded relief layer is. If you might remember when we looked at the shaded relief last time, there's an option where if you, let's just take another look at it. So in the shaded relief, you've got, this would be the alpha version. And then if you chose the enhanced, this is a multiply option where it won't block out the information underneath and completely at least, and gives you some of that fake 3D view. Whereas the plain old shaded relief is the alpha and it completely covers up the underlying layers. Well, that happens to be what we are looking for. If I could find my map again. And so this is one of these things that you do want to save to your account. And because this is something that you will reuse over and over and over. Now, you could add multiple lighting sources so that you had a light coming from all different angles. I like having separate ones that I can switch on and off. And I'll show you mine here in a second. So now if I click save on this one, now I've got this test layer here. Let's get rid of that guy. And so now we have the lighting source coming up from the southeast, and it gives us a little bit different view on those same features that we were picking out, but could barely see. Now, these are all the ones that I've created. And so I have one from the southeast at 10 degrees, which I think gives, most of mine are all like at a 10 degree. But you know, you can, and it's interesting because a lot of times you'll see part of a logging road in one view, and then when you switch to another view, you'll see, you know, another segment of it. And so even if you can't see it in one, if you change the light source around, you might see all of it. And then I do have a few here, like I've got the north at a 10 degree azimuth, but then also I have one at 25. And so this is, like I said, this is in my opinion, the killer feature in CalTopo. It has helped me out tremendously in finding routes. I was hoping Ryan would be on tonight so I could give him a hard time. So.
Yeah, I'm here.
I
came late.
You snuck in. So a couple weeks ago, I was down in Atlanta, and I was going to go run and do an activation of Sawney Mountain after the Ham Fest. And my dear friend Ryan said, "Oh yes, you can go in. Normally people come up on a road and just get out of the car and do a quick activation." But Ryan said, "Oh sure, you can hike in on the trail. And it's just a short walk through open woods." And I said, "Oh,
Gotta go between some stuff.
that sounds great." So, I even drew up this quick little map with the activation zone. Ryan didn't say, "No, I don't think that looks right." So I head up there, and I didn't do my due diligence. I should have done this. And so if I had pulled up the shaded relief, I would have seen all of this around the summit. And anytime it gets kind of fuzzy, that's usually an indication of, rocks or boulders. And so, it turns out that, yeah, it's an open forest walk if you just happen to go through this small crack between the rocks right here. That's all you got to do.
Yeah, you were way left. When you saw the pictures, I'm like, oh, I know where you were.
This was like 45 minutes of me clawing through rhododendron and thinking I was going to fall to my death. So, but Ryan was kind enough to come up and pick me up and drive me back to my car.
I felt sorry for you, so I'm like, I'm gonna come up to the top and give you a ride down.
So it all worked out. So that, I do believe, is all I've got for you tonight. Anybody have any questions?
Well, I have to play with this stuff. That's cool.
Yeah. So there's always something new, something different.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Pat, did you upload that track into SOTA maps for everybody to?
Laugh at? No, I did not. Yeah, I am not a climber, and and it was one of those things. It's like I got up to that point, and well, let's just use what we've learned. Let me minimize you guys again. I got to that point and I was like, oh, maybe if I can just get over this, 10-foot band of cliffs, maybe I'll be better. And then I looked at the map and I'm like, well, I'm like 30 feet below the activation zone even now. I'm like, I'm not going to get there this way. And so then I clawed my way back down. But it was a good activation and a complete. That's all that matters.